Hi, I'm Dr. Riff from Cocoa, and today we're going to talk about the third major food group, and that's proteins. Proteins are the complex molecules that our body needs to operate properly. They allow all the chemical reactions in our body to occur. They carry our oxygen through a protein called hemoglobin. They make our muscles work through a protein called myoglobin. They provide our antibodies, which are made of protein. Also, our body structure is made of protein. Our muscles, our tendons, our ligaments, our bones are all full of protein. Now, proteins in our body are always being broken down and remade, and most of those broken down proteins are reused. But it turns out a little bit gets away each day, and so we need to renew those proteins that get away in order to make sure that our body has enough building blocks of protein to build all of the complex chemicals that we need. Even though we hear a lot about protein, it turns out that most of us get enough protein in our diet. Most Americans do not have a protein problem. The recommended amount of protein is about 0.3 grams for each pound of body weight. So that means for your average 180-pound person, we're going to need somewhere around 60 grams of protein per day. And as you'll see, 60 grams is not a particularly high amount of protein that's difficult to get. Eating protein has a lot of benefits. One of the most important ones is that when we eat protein, it makes us feel full. And when we feel full, we're not wanting to snack. So adding protein, particularly to our breakfasts, can help us feel full all day long and help us prevent snacking during the day. Eating protein helps us control our blood sugar levels. So those of us who are struggling with high blood sugar and trying to get it under control, adding protein to our diet can actually reduce our blood sugar spikes by up to 40%, which is quite a bit, by adding protein to a meal. Protein is used in our bones, and so for those of us who, as we get older, it can help prevent osteoporosis and the thinning and the weakening of bone that can occur. And finally, making sure that our body has enough protein to build muscles and to build the other important structures that we need to keep ourselves healthy. Well, where do we get protein? Most of us, when we ask where does protein come from, the first thing that comes to mind is meat. And we all know that meat's got a lot of protein in it. Meat is a good source of protein. Each ounce of meat contains about 7 grams of protein. So since we said the average person needs about 60 grams of protein a day, we're really talking about 7 to 8 ounces of meat per day, which is not a large amount of meat. But while meat's a good source of protein, red meat in particular, meat has problems associated with it. First of all, red meats frequently come with fat. So whether it's a steak that's got marbling on it or whether it's ground beef that's got fat in it, when we eat red meats, we end up eating fat along with our protein. And ideally, we wouldn't do that. We want to eat fat the way we want to eat fat, with healthy fat, not just have fat come along for the ride when we're eating protein. Remember, we're trying to keep our saturated fat input down around 10% of our fats. And if we're eating a lot of red meat, we're going to be eating a lot of saturated fat that we don't want. The other problem with meat as a source of protein is that meat doesn't have any fiber. And we know that fiber is good for us. It helps keep our blood sugar under control. It helps prevent colon cancer, and it helps with our digestion. And finally, a lot of meat in the United States has hormones in it. And in general, we want to stay away from artificial hormones in the things that we eat. So to get healthy protein from meat, we want to focus on the right kinds of meat. And that's really the secret here. The best is fish. Fish is full of protein. It's got no saturated fat or very little saturated fat. And it has a lot of very healthy fats in it. So if we're looking for protein from meats, fish goes to the top of the list for sure. What other meats do we look at? We can look at red meat with the fat cut off. We can look at ground beef, like this ground beef here, which is lean ground beef, which takes most of the fat out of it so that we're just dealing with the protein and not the fat in there. Chicken thighs and chicken breasts with the skin cut off is a very good source of protein. Again, the skin is where the fats are in chicken. We take the skin off, we get basically pure protein in very little fat. We don't have to give up pork. There are cuts of pork that have high protein and low fat. Pork loin, pork shoulder, and round steak all are good sources of protein without fat. Ground turkey is another source of meat and protein without fat. But moving away from meat, it turns out there are other places we can get protein without meat. Dairy is a key source of protein. Cheese, milk, and eggs. Milk has about 1 gram of protein per fluid ounce. So an 8-ounce glass of milk has about 8 grams of protein in it. So if we have low fat or no fat milk, we're getting about 8 grams of protein with no fat. Greek yogurt is one of the absolute best sources of protein. A 6-ounce portion of Greek yogurt has about 30 grams of protein, which is almost half of our daily requirement. And if it's non-fat, non-sweetened Greek yogurt, it's got no fat and it's got no sugar with it. So it's basically a pure source of 30 grams of protein or so. Eggs each have about 7 grams of protein in it, and they don't have saturated fat. Is there anywhere else to get protein without either meat or dairy? And the answer is yes. There is a lot of protein in vegetables, grains, and nuts. The best vegetables for protein are broccoli, spinach, asparagus, artichokes, potatoes, sweet potatoes, and Brussels sprouts, which all have about 6 grams of protein per cooked cup. The best nuts for protein are dry roasted peanuts, pistachios, and walnuts, which all have about 6 grams of protein per handful. And then finally, one other place to get protein is from protein powders, protein milkshakes, and protein bars. They provide a lot of protein. The trick is to find the protein shakes that aren't also loaded with sugar or with fat, so that we're getting pure protein. So what's the bottom line on protein? It's an important part of our diet. Most of us don't have trouble getting enough protein. The trick is getting enough protein without getting a lot of unhealthy stuff along with it, like fats in particular. So we focus on lean meat and fish, vegetables, nuts, grains, and perhaps a protein shake or some protein powder, and a limited amount of dairy. Let me give you some examples of what a healthy protein meal might be. So for example, for breakfast, you can have 2 eggs, which will give you 2 grams of protein and 150 calories. 6 ounces of Greek yogurt, which will give you 29 grams of protein and 100 calories. An 8-ounce glass of low-fat milk, which will give you 8 grams of protein and about 100 calories. So that breakfast just gave us 50 grams of protein and 350 calories. Now we said we need 50 to 60 grams of protein a day, so you've pretty much gotten all the protein you need by the time you finish breakfast with that kind of breakfast. So that's a high protein breakfast, low calories, no fat, very healthy. How about lunch? Turkey sandwich with mayonnaise has 28 grams of protein. A protein shake like Muscle Milk Zero has 20 grams of protein in it. And we can add some taro chips for flavor. So in summary, most of us get enough protein in our meals. We want to make sure that we are getting protein that is healthy protein, that's not associated with a lot of fat and a lot of sugar. And where we want to look is in fish, lean meats, vegetables, nuts, and grains. And if we do that, we'll be sure that we're getting enough protein to make our bodies healthy. Well, now we're going to put it all together. We've talked about carbohydrates, fats, and protein as the major components of our food, but up till now it's kind of been theoretical. We've talked a lot about grams of this or ounces of that, and it's time for us to start moving to what does that really look like when we start putting our meals together. You're going to be working with your health coaches to actually understand how to take this information and turn it into a diet. Because there are a lot of moving parts, and we understand that. On the one hand, you're trying to balance saturated fat versus unsaturated fat, sugars versus starch versus fiber, healthy protein, unhealthy protein. And then if we want to start adding questions about diabetes or hypertension, now we also start to worry about sugars and salt. So there are a lot of moving pieces, and most of us aren't immediately good at knowing how to do that. Your health coaches will help you learn how to turn all of this information into practical diet selections. But I thought it would be worthwhile taking just a couple of minutes to go through, just to summarize what we've already talked about, and sort of give you one menu. I put together a menu last night that I'll talk through here with you, just to show you that you can eat pretty well, and you can eat some very good food while keeping on a calorie-restricted diet and meeting all of our various requirements for not too much fat, not too much sugar, not too many carbohydrates, enough protein. And while it sounds complicated, when it all comes together, it actually turns into a pretty good meal plan. So that's what we're going to do. Let's start, though, with our summary with calories. Most of the people in our Ulu Laukahi program are trying to lose some weight. For our women who are trying to lose weight, we're recommending about 1,600 calories per day, and for our men, about 1,800 calories per day. If you're not trying to lose weight, you can add about 200 calories per day to each of those diet recommendations. Again, this is something that your health coach will go over with you. Now, within those calories, we've got some recommendations about how many carbs, how much fat, and how much protein to eat. Carbohydrates, we want to be about 50% of our total calories. That's 800 calories for women, about 900 calories for men. We want to focus on healthy carbohydrates, like those found in unprocessed foods, fruits, vegetables, grains, and avoiding unhealthy carbohydrates like sugar and white starches like white bread and white rice. If you remember nothing else about carbohydrates, no white foods and minimize sugar. We want to make sure we're getting enough fiber, which is another important part of our carbohydrates. With fats, fat should be about 30% of our total calories. Our goal is not to eliminate fat in our diet. We need fat in our diet. The trick is we want to eat healthy fat and not unhealthy fat. So 30% of total calories for women is about 53 grams of fat, and for men about 60 grams of fat. Our healthy fats are our monounsaturated fats and our polyunsaturated fats, like canola oil, avocado oil, peanut oil, and olive oil. And we want to minimize the less healthy saturated fats that we find in animal products. And that includes things like butter and meat. Remember, liquid fats are healthier than solid fats. Fats that are liquid at room temperature are unsaturated, while fats that are solid at room temperature tend to be saturated fats. So liquid fats are generally healthier. And then finally, protein. About 20% of our total calories comes from protein. With protein, we want about 20% of our total calories to be coming from protein. And this translates into about 80 grams of protein for women, 90 grams for men, both of which are above the recommended amount of about 70 grams for the average American. So what would a typical diet look like that follows those recommendations? Let's do an example here of a woman on a 1,600 calorie per day diet. And I hope to show you, as I said, that you can eat pretty well while eating healthy food and limiting calories. So for breakfast, we're going to have an egg vegetable scramble. We're going to take 2 eggs. We're going to take a tablespoon of, I can't believe it's not butter, because that's full of polyunsaturated fats as opposed to butter, which is full of saturated fats. We're going to put in a couple of teaspoons of tomato sauce along with a cup of cooked vegetables and have a piece of whole wheat bread or toast. That breakfast is going to be 446 calories, 53 grams of carbs, 21 grams of fat, 34 grams of protein, and 9 grams of fiber. So full of healthy components. For lunch, we're going to have a turkey sandwich with mayonnaise. So 6 ounces of turkey meat, 2 slices of whole wheat bread, a teaspoon of mayonnaise, a half a bag of taro chips, a diet soda, and an apple. I think a very reasonable lunch. That lunch is 510 calories with 60 grams of carbohydrates, of which 4 grams are fiber, 15 grams of fat, almost all of which are monounsaturated or polyunsaturated fat, and 43 grams of protein. And finally, for dinner, we're going to have grilled mahi-mahi. We're going to have 6 ounces of mahi-mahi, a cup of sweet potato, a cup of broccoli, a cup of brown rice, a glass of red wine, and a cup of blueberries for dessert. In total, and a cup of blueberries for dessert. That is a total of 669 calories for dinner. So overall for the day, our meal has 1,625 calories. We have 206 grams of carbs, 29 grams of fiber, or 25 to 30 grams of fiber per day is recommended. Our day has 47 grams of fat, of which only 8 grams are saturated. And we have 117 grams of protein, which is way above the 70 grams recommended. So I understand that meal plan might not be exactly what you want to eat, but my goal was to show that you can eat normal food. You don't have to eat special diet food. You don't have to buy Weight Watchers food. The interesting thing is that the healthiest foods tend to be the least expensive. We think of eating healthy as being expensive, but in fact, healthy foods are the unprocessed and unpackaged foods. It's the processed and packaged foods that we pay more for. The broccoli that we get at the produce counter, the spinach that we get at the produce counter, those are inexpensive compared to the more expensive things that we buy, which are processed foods. So we can have a very healthy diet within a very reasonable cost while still eating a very tasty meal. As time goes on, you're going to get a lot better at putting your meals together. It'll be a little overwhelming at first, but after a couple of weeks, you'll begin to get a feel for, oh yeah, I can add some protein here, and I don't want to add this fat, so maybe I'll add some yogurt to this, and I need some more vegetables. And I have no doubt that within a few weeks, you'll be putting together healthy diets without any problems at all. So that's the overview. You now have all the background that you need to understand the different nutrients within our diet. You know which ones are good ones, you know which ones are not so good ones, and you've begun to learn how to put those together into a meal plan that meets your needs. Over the course of the next year, we will be working together to help you plan your meals, make sure that you stay on track, and move you toward eating the most healthy way that you can. Thanks very much.